Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amanda Haddaway, and I want to thank you for participating in today's session. This is part of the Chamber's S.H.E Week programming, and I want to thank the committee for reaching out to me and asking me to speak about my journey in small business. As a Frederick County native, as a small business owner, and as an active chamber member, I'm so excited to share a little bit of my story and my entrepreneurial journey, and also to give you some tips if you're thinking of launching your own business. So let's get started with the presentation. I think it's safe to say that 2020 has been a year like none other. This has been a very challenging time for many of us, particularly those in the small business community. And one thing that has become a takeaway for me from all of this is that there is a tremendous amount of grit and resiliency in our local small business community. We even saw some new businesses launch during COVID and during the time that we were all on stay-at-home orders. So it's been a year like nothing I've ever seen before. And I think that it shows the strength of our local business community. And so I wanted to start off our time together just sharing some data and some statistics about businesses, because I want you to have an idea of the landscape that we're currently in. So let's take a look at a few facts and figures. So there are approximately 13 million women-owned businesses in the United States, which is a huge number of women-owned businesses, and I think that that's a great thing. We're also seeing that the rate that women start businesses is much higher than that of men starting businesses, so that number is going to continue to grow. In addition to those women who own the businesses, nearly 9 million Americans are also employed by women-owned businesses, and this really speaks to the fact that women businesses and employees of women-owned businesses are huge economic drivers to our local economy, but also to the national economy. We have a very strong voice. An estimated $1.9 trillion in revenue is produced annually by women-owned businesses. You know, that's a huge, huge amount of money that's being generated by women-owned businesses, and that's something that we should all be proud of. And women of color account for nearly 90% of the new women-owned businesses annually. And again, that number continues to grow as well. But I want to be honest with you, because it's not all cupcakes and rainbows and unicorns and puppies and all those things that make our hearts happy. Being in business is hard work. There has been more than one occasion where I have just had a total and complete meltdown. And some of you that are watching this know me personally and know that I'm not much of a crier, but there have been days where I have been so frustrated or so overwhelmed that I just didn't know what else to do. And I love being in business for myself, but it's taken a while to get to the point where I am in my business currently. And I'm not alone in this. I want to share some additional statistics about the failure rates of small businesses, because it's pretty significant. So 20% of all businesses, and this is women-owned and male-owned businesses, 20% fail in the first 2 years after opening. 45% fail in the first 5 years, and that number goes up to an overwhelming 65% of businesses fail in their first 10 years. Only 25% of all businesses survive 15 years or more. And if you've been watching the news, you've seen that retail and tourism specifically have taken a huge hit in 2020. And some of these businesses are not going to survive the calendar year. Although many small businesses don't make the news, like a J.C. Penney's or a Pier 1 or J. Crew or some other big brand name, the data shows overwhelmingly that being in business is a hard path. But I'm here to tell you that even though it's hard, for me, it has been totally worth it. I want to share a little bit about my personal story, and then we'll move into some tips that I think will help you if you're considering launching your own business or beginning your own entrepreneurial journey. So I guess you could say that I come by entrepreneurship honestly, because my grandmother was in business for herself. My dad and my mom were both business owners and self-employed in their careers as well. My grandmother owned a restaurant and ran a restaurant. My dad owned a very successful construction equipment dealership that had 5 locations throughout Maryland and Delaware. And my mom, as a social worker, was in private practice for a period of time and ran her own business. So a little over 5 years ago, I came home from work. I was still working for someone else at the time. And I had a conversation with my husband, who has always been crazy supportive of my ideas and dreams and aspirations. And I told him that I wanted to give starting a business a shot. And I wasn't sure what he was going to say. And he was even more supportive than I had anticipated. And I'm forever grateful for that. And so I gave it more thought, and I realized that I needed some starting capital to start up the business initiative. And I thought that if I was really careful with the money side of things, that if I took out $5,000 from our savings account, that would give me kind of the seed money to get started. Now, I realize that some of you may not have $5,000 in savings, and that's okay. You don't necessarily need that much money to start a business, but this was where I felt comfortable in starting. And I wanted to have a little money in the bank to be able to afford some of the things that I needed to get started. And so I took out $5,000, set up a business banking account, and I gave myself a self-imposed deadline of 6 months. So I wanted to be up and running and have my first couple clients within a 6-month period of time. And to be totally honest, I wouldn't really consider myself much of a risk taker. So this was probably one of the biggest risks that I've ever taken in my entire life. I was leaving a regular paycheck, a good paycheck at that, benefits from an employer, and I was starting something totally from scratch, totally from the ground up. So $5,000 in 6 months, those are my self-imposed constraints. And I want to share with you that during that first year, although I worked a tremendous amount of hours, I was not only able to pay back our savings account, I was fortunate enough to replace the full-time income that I had from my previous employer. And I have a shirt that says "The hustle is real," and the hustle was definitely real that first year. It was really, really hard work. A lot of sweat equity went into making that first year successful. But for me, it's always easier to work hard for something that you want. And there's a big difference between working for yourself and building your own business and working for someone else. So I don't know how to actually capture this in words to explain the difference, but what I can tell you is it's a feeling, and it's also so incredibly rewarding when you know that you are solely responsible for building your own future. If my business fails, that's on me directly. If I mess up or I have a failure and I work for someone else, it's still a big deal, but it may not be as detrimental as if I make a huge mistake in my own business. On the flip side, on the positive side, when I do something really great in my business, that feeling is so personal and so rewarding. I do want to share, though, that if I can do this, I truly believe that anyone else can do this. And so if you are thinking about dipping your toe into that entrepreneurial pond, I totally encourage you to do so, because although it's hard work, it's a wonderful, wonderful accomplishment. And it's just a great way to build a life for yourself beyond just making a living working for someone else. One of the questions that I get asked most often is, if you were going to give advice to someone who is thinking of starting their own business, what would you say? And so I created the SNAPS method as a way for you to take away and remember some of the key tips that I think are really important for your success. So SNAPS is an acronym, and we're going to go through each of those steps. And the first one is to start now. I love this quote on this planner that says, "Do something today that your future self will thank you for." So for me, I considered entrepreneurship for a long time. In fact, I started doing some freelance work on the side for about 3 years prior to launching my business full time and going full time as my own employer, if you will. And looking back, I really wish I had done this sooner. And so my first step of the SNAPS method is to start now. Maybe you're not in a place that you can do this full time. Maybe you need to do something similar to what I did with taking on a few freelance projects here and there. But start thinking about the planning piece and the foundational elements of what you want your business to look like. I had a notebook, like kind of a journal type notebook, where when I would see ideas or I would see what other companies were doing, if I thought it was a good idea, I would jot that down. I started to save online resources as kind of a library to go back and reference later. And so all of these little things start to add up. You don't have to go from 0 to 100% overnight, but taking little incremental steps and starting to lay out the foundation and the groundwork of how you're going to get from where you are now, working for someone else, to working for yourself and creating your own business really needs to start as soon as possible. So the next step of the SNAPS method is to network. When I was starting out my business, it was super scary. And I remember some of the first conversations that I had with people, and these were trusted colleagues in my existing network. As an HR professional, I've always been very active in our professional association, which is called the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM. And we have a chapter here in Frederick County. And I remember going to a lunch meeting. We meet monthly at Dutch's Daughter. And I was so nervous to tell some of my colleagues and people on my network about what I was doing. And I just took a leap of faith, and I let a couple close associates know that I was going to be leaving my full-time job and launching my own business. And it turns out that these people were super encouraging and really just wanted me to be successful. And a really interesting phenomenon happened. These were people who were HR managers and directors within their own businesses. And when I started telling them about the work that I wanted to be doing in my own business, they said, "Oh, I think I have a project. I'd like to hire you to do this." And then I talked to a few more people, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, we were thinking about bringing in an outside consultant or an outside trainer." And so because I had spent several years building and growing my professional network, these are the people that became my first clients. So I've been fortunate to never be in a situation where I had to do a lot of cold calling or hard sales techniques. Instead, I was able to just put it out into my network, into the universe, if you will, and it was returned to me tenfold, 100-fold probably, that people wanted to work with me. And all of that came from the fact that I had worked really hard to build up a local network of people in my field. And so there are lots of opportunities, regardless of what industry or what profession you're in. It's likely that you have a professional association or some type of group that you can get involved with. Certainly, the chamber is a great resource that brings together various different types of industries and professionals throughout the area. There are also other types of local business groups. So if you're not familiar with those types of opportunities, I definitely encourage you to explore that further, because you do want to start building that network. And like I said, you may not be ready or in a place financially to make the jump to working full-time in your own business, and that's okay. But this networking piece is something that you can do even when you're still working for another employer. The third step of the SNAPS method is to approach work methodically. You will find as a business owner, there are never enough hours in the day. And so you have to become very structured in the way that you approach and do work. And so the way that you've done work for someone else is probably going to shift, because right now you're an individual contributor in your organization. When you launch your own business, you not only have to do the work, but you have to do the sales and marketing and the accounting and the billing and the social media and everything else that goes along with running a business. And so because you only have 24 hours in a day, and hopefully you're not working all 24, you need to be sleeping some as well, you need to get into a really disciplined approach. As a part of this, when you start making money in your business, you want to think about where you can outsource or where you can hire someone to assist you with some of those functions. During my first year of business, I was pretty much operating on a shoestring budget. You know, I told you I started with $5,000. In the whole scheme of things, that's not a whole lot of money. So I was pretty much doing every piece of the business. And I knew that I needed some type of accounting system. I did my research and I determined that QuickBooks was the best tool for my type of business and a business of my size. And I also very quickly learned that I hate QuickBooks. Now, there's nothing wrong with QuickBooks. Let me just say that right up front. But I'm not an accountant. I don't have a very strong accounting or financial background. And I found myself getting super frustrated and also spending more time than I needed to be spending on invoicing and reconciling all of the statements monthly. And so for me, one of the first things that I outsourced was my bookkeeping work. And I hired an amazing bookkeeper who is someone local. So if anyone needs a bookkeeping recommendation, let me know. She's amazing. And I also started to look at other parts of the business that could be outsourced. And so my very first logo for my business was something that I created in Canva. And it was not professional, but it worked initially. And when I got enough money, I hired a professional graphic designer, also someone who is local and is amazing. So happy to give you that referral as well. And as I continued in my business, there were a couple other things that I decided to outsource as well. Although I love using social media, I think many of us can agree that it takes a lot of time. And so some of my social media and content gathering and marketing communications, like my monthly newsletter to my clients, those are all things that I've outsourced over the past couple years. And the reason for doing this is it frees up my time to work directly with clients and do the actual human resources and training work that I'm so passionate about. And that's the work that was the reason I wanted to go into business. So I still needed to get these other back office things done, but I realized that it didn't necessarily have to be me doing it. Prioritizing is also a part of the SNAPS method. And I love this, things to do today, own today. Each day is a new opportunity to do your best work. And like I said, you have to be very intentional about the things that get your focus. When you own your own business, there's not a day that exists where your desk is totally clean and there's not something else to do or something else that needs your attention. And so you're never going to be totally done with your to-do list, but you have to get into a practice of prioritizing what's important, because those are the things that need your focus. And again, putting some of the work to a team approach, outsourcing or hiring folks, that may help. But also for the tasks that you're responsible for doing within the business, it's super important that you're able to prioritize those items. And then finally, the last piece is to systemize. So you need to do whatever it takes to ensure that you're using your time in the most effective way possible. And part of that can be done by determining various tools as well as technology that help you to serve your clients and your customers better, and also to help keep you organized. So I'll give you just one example that has worked effectively in my business. I noticed that I was spending a lot of time emailing documents back and forth to clients. I'd do a piece of work for them and then I'd send them the deliverable, and then maybe a couple months down the road they'd say, oh, can you resend that to me, or can you send that to me again? Which, yes, that's totally fine, I can do that. So I decided that it might be more effective if I created a client portal where clients can go and access any of their documents at any time without my involvement. And so we use a system that allows us to create a personalized and secure client portal for each of our clients. So they get a unique login. They only have access to the files that I give them access to. And at any time, they can go in there and download the information that they need. Also, if we're working on a new project together and they need to share information with me, they can upload documents into this portal. So that's just one example of how I've been able to systemize in my business. So just as a review, the SNAPS method: start now, network, approach work methodically, prioritize, and systemize. So super simple system. This isn't rocket science, but these are some things that have really made a difference in my personal business. And hopefully, if you're thinking of going into business for yourself, this is something that you can incorporate as well, or at least give you some food for thought. I also want to take a minute to talk about balance, because this is something that I'm super passionate about, and I find that it's really important when owning a business. I have many friends and colleagues who own their own businesses, and some of those folks are way better at work-life balance, or just balance in general, than I am. I am not perfect at this by any means, but when I started my business, one of the things that was really important to me was to have flexibility. And so I didn't want to be working, 50, 60 hours for someone else any longer per week. I wanted to have the ability to be more flexible, to travel, to spend time with friends and family, to really make my life work with work, not to, work to live. And so this piece on balance is super important to me. And I urge you to also give it some consideration if you're thinking of going into business for yourself. When you own a business, it can be all consuming if you let it. And particularly when you're starting out, that first year I worked a tremendous amount of hours. But now that I've been in business for 5 years, I am able to structure my work so that it works for me and that I don't feel like I'm being overworked or that I'm going to burn out. So just something to consider if you're thinking about going into business. So, like I said, I don't feel that I've done anything extraordinary. I feel like I worked hard, that I was given some opportunities, and that I've hustled enough to make it successful. But I do want to say to all of you that if you are passionate and you have a dream about working for yourself, you can totally do this. This is something that any of us can do. I really believe if you give it thought and you plan out what you're going to do, and you really work the plan and work through the steps that you lay out. And if you're not sure where to start, there are a ton of free resources out there, and even locally, there are business startup organizations that can assist you. So, two that come to mind are Fitzy and Score, but certainly the Frederick City Office of Economic Development and then Frederick County Economic Development can also be resources to you. And there are a ton of others. Also, too, a lot of local business owners would be happy to spend a half hour with you talking about, the things that they went through and maybe give you some helpful pointers that could help you to not make the same mistakes that they made. So as I kicked off the presentation and said that 2020 has been a challenging year, I would say that if we had to pick one word to represent this calendar year, that word would be pivot. When the COVID pandemic started back in March, I saw my calendar pretty much obliterated. So my calendar normally books up about 3 months in advance, and virtually overnight, all of my consulting and training and speaking engagements were pretty much canceled. And it was a really scary time because when you're a business owner, you are responsible for making your own income. And so very quickly, I had to pivot, and many of my fellow business owners had to do the same thing. We found that being flexible became our new lifeblood, and things didn't always go as planned. And I think that this really illustrated that you do have to be resilient, and you have to prepare for the unexpected, because none of us could have anticipated that our businesses would really be shut down for a couple months. And even those that were considered essential services saw that their client base was dramatically reduced. So, although this isn't part of the SNAPS method, I do want you to consider your contingency plans and how you can be flexible, and what would you do if everything changed overnight. And it's likely that you aren't able to map out the exact plan. None of us can predict the future. At least I can't. So giving some thought to some of those worst case scenarios can just help you prepare for the unexpected things that come up. I hope that this information was helpful to you. I hope that some of you who were kind of on the fence about whether or not you wanted to start a business or not feel inspired to take the next steps. I hope that you'll all follow your dreams. And I would love to stay in touch with you and to be a resource to you if I can be of assistance. So on the screen, I've provided you with my email address, as well as my company website, HR Answer Box, and a link to our signature training program, which is called New Manager Bootcamp. Thanks so much for your time and participation in this session, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the S.H.E Week programming. Have a great day.